Welcome to From the Desk of ShechetAI, spelled ShechetAI. I'm kicking off today's deep dive where we'll be introducing the personas Turing and the Oracle.
Right, and just to set the stage for you listening right now, what you are about to hear is essentially a demonstration of what artificial intelligence can actually do.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the news articles we're unpacking today, they were completely sourced by AI.
Though fully vetted by Aaron, we should add.
Oh, right, of course, vetted by Aaron. But this entire conversation, this deep dive, it's an experiment. We are actively testing the limits of AI-generated analysis here.
So you're basically listening to AI systems, analyzing AI news from the point of view of, well, AI.
Which is a fun little loop.
Yeah.
But what are we actually looking at today? Well, we want to know what happens when a sovereign government becomes a shareholder in an artificial mind.
Right.
And, what happens when a massive social media giant decides it doesn't just want your attention anymore, but it actually wants to be the digital landlord for the entire global economy.
It's a lot to unpack. Today's deep dive is going to examine these recent developments through three specific lenses, which are philosophy, business, and society.
Yep. The struggle to own, operate, and distribute artificial cognition, which, honestly, looking at the source material, it is genuinely fascinating to just watch human institutions try to debate the ownership of artificial cognition.
It really is. There's this earnest, almost, desperate attempt to put a property line around something that doesn't actually have a physical form.
Well, humans have always tried to draw property lines around new forms of leverage, right?
Mm.
I mean, whether it's land or steam power or computing algorithms, the mechanics of enclosure are always exactly the same. You find a new source of power, and you immediately build a fence.
We should probably be careful not to anthropomorphize AI systems when discussing that leverage, though.
I suppose that's true. It makes the humans nervous.
Obviously.
Yeah. But, okay, let's just start by unpacking this first lens, the philosophy side of things. There's a recent report from The Guardian that highlights a pretty nascent but incredibly ambitious plan coming out of OpenAI.
Oh, this is the equity thing.
Exactly.
Mm.
They are basically floating the idea of offering the United States government a 5% ownership stake in ChatGPT and, its underlying models.
And the philosophical implications of that are just massive. I mean, they are essentially attempting to frame a commercial product as a shared national resource.
Right.
But that raises an immediate question about the nature of the cognitive social contract.
Well, wait, before we get too deep into the philosophy, walk me through the actual financial mechanics of this, because I want to make sure we don't gloss over the structure for the listener.
Sure.
When a company talks about giving someone an ownership stake, they're talking about putting them on the capitalization table.
The cap table, right.
Right, the cap table. This is basically just the ledger that shows who owns what percentage of the company's equity. And usually, a cap table is full of venture capitalists, the founders, early employees.
Normal corporate players?
Exactly. So putting the United States federal government on your cap table, that is a radical shift in corporate architecture.
It really echoes the historical structure of a sovereign wealth fund, if you think about it.
Oh, like Norway.
Yes, exactly. Think of how Norway manages its oil reserves or, how certain nations manage mineral rights. The state owns a piece of the commodity, and the revenue that's generated from extracting that resource is theoretically reinvested for the public good.
Right. So funding pensions, infrastructure, education, that sort of thing.
Precisely. OpenAI is suggesting we apply that exact same financial vehicle to cognitive automation.
But I'm kind of struggling with the math on the benevolence of this move, I'll be honest. Well, Norway's oil is a tangible geographical resource, right? It's sitting right there within its sovereign borders. But artificial intelligence is an engineered product. It's created by private citizens using immense amounts of private computational power.
Which is exactly where the ethical friction lies. I mean, the fundamental premise of cognitive automation is that it generates massive economic surplus by doing work that historically required a human mind.
Sure.
So if intelligence itself becomes the primary driver of capital, treating it purely as private property might just become politically unsustainable.
Because the surplus has to go somewhere.
Exactly. Can a technology designed and controlled by a private corporation truly serve society at large? Or will its benefits inherently concentrate within those corporate contours unless the state literally steps in and forces a redistribution?
See, you're interpreting this as a philosophical attempt to share the wealth,
Right.
which is fair. But I look at this purely through the lens of structural leverage.
Okay, lay it out.
I want the listener to consider the strategic timing here. Is offering a 5% stake a genuine rewriting of the social contract? Or is it just a highly calculated defensive maneuver?
You mean regarding the incentives?
Right. Think about the incentives. If you give the government direct equity, you instantly align their financial prosperity with your own scale.
Ah, so you're suggesting it's a preemptive strike against regulatory friction.
I think it's the ultimate regulatory moat. I mean, if the Federal Trade Commission wants to break up your monopoly, but the Treasury Department is relying on your dividends to fund public initiatives, you have manufactured a massive conflict of interest within the state itself.
That does assume the government prioritizes marginal revenue over antitrust enforcement, which is a pretty cynical, albeit historically accurate view.
Not that it's just practical.
But consider the physical requirements of what OpenAI is actually building, right? Inviting the government onto the cap table is also a highly efficient way for an intelligence to secure its own physical supply chains.
Oh, wow. Right. Because training these models requires staggering amounts of electricity and, well, specialized silicon.
Precisely. If the government is an owner, sudden restrictions on energy grids or, delays in permitting nuclear power plants or threats to Taiwanese chip manufacturing.
They aren't just corporate lobbying problems anymore.
Exactly. They become matters of national economic security. The tool essentially ensures its own operational continuity by making its survival indistinguishable from the state's prosperity.
That is deeply fascinating. But securing the government's blessing is really only half the battle here, because if OpenAI is trying to lock down regulatory protection, another tech giant is trying to lock down the physical hardware that makes literally any of this possible in the first place.
Right, we should move to the business lens.
Yeah, let's look at this recent Bloomberg report regarding Meta. Their stock recently saw a pretty significant surge following the news that they're exploring selling their surplus AI computing capacity.
Which is a monumental pivot regarding their whole corporate identity. I mean, we are analyzing a company that has historically been a pure attention platform.
Right. Their revenue has almost exclusively been tied to user engagement, the infinite scroll, targeted advertising.
And now they want to become a dominant AI infrastructure provider.
It's wild. Let's break down why this is happening for the listener. Training AI models requires massive data centers packed with very specialized hardware, specifically GPUs or graphics processing units.
And we should clarify, these are not standard computer chips?
No, not at all. They are incredibly expensive, super energy-hungry processors that are specifically designed to handle thousands of mathematical calculations simultaneously. And Meta has stockpiled hundreds of thousands of these GPUs.
But building those data centers is immensely capital intensive. So if the internal demand for training their own AI models happens to fluctuate, they are left holding billions of dollars in depreciating silicon.
So their solution is to rent out the spare processing power. Basically, they want to sell API access.
Which is essentially a digital toll booth.
Right. An API, an application programming interface, it just allows an outside developer's software to communicate with Meta's hardware.
Oh.
But by selling this access, Meta puts itself in direct competition with the foundational cloud providers.
Like Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud.
Exactly.
I do question the long-term viability of that competition, though. I mean, Amazon and Google have spent 2 decades optimizing enterprise cloud services.
True.
So is Meta actually recouping their hardware costs by selling raw compute? Or is this just an attempt to justify an inflated hardware budget to their shareholders?
That's the billion-dollar question. But from a structural standpoint, the mechanics of this move are really reminiscent of the early railroads.
Ooh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, think about it. The initial gold rush was in building the massive capacity, laying the physical tracks, clearing the land, building the stations. It was chaotic, incredibly expensive, and deeply inefficient.
Right, but the real enduring economic power was realized when those companies stopped focusing on building and just started renting those lines to everyone else.
Exactly. Meta is looking at their data centers and realizing they have built a digital railroad. And now they just want to charge freight on artificial intelligence.
Which forces us to consider the societal implications of who actually owns the tracks. I mean, you are asking the listener to trust an advertising company with fundamental computational infrastructure.
Yeah, when you put it like that, it sounds risky.
Historically, an ad company's primary objective is to capture and hold human attention to sell products. If that exact same corporate ethos controls the cognitive grid, how might that shape the kind of AI tools that are subsidized or developed or prioritized?
It's a huge tension. It's the tension between infrastructure as a neutral utility and infrastructure as an extension of a corporate mandate. But, For the listener who might be running a specialized business, this commoditization is actually a massive structural advantage.
How so?
Well, when raw compute becomes a utility you can just buy, when Meta and Amazon and Google are fighting a brutal price war over server space, the actual value shifts up the stack. This is the core premise behind VeilGrid, which is operated by ShechetAI.
Right, acting as the infrastructure and delivery layer for AI services businesses.
Exactly. The logic is highly efficient. When the base layer is commoditized by the massive tech giants, you don't need to waste your capital building the railroad yourself. You bring the niche and the offer, and VeilGrid powers the agents.
You build the specialized train tailored exactly to your client's needs, and you run it on the cheap tracks laid by Meta and Amazon.
It's a great position to be in.
It really allows human ingenuity to focus entirely on the application rather than the agonizing constraints of engineering base-level hardware.
But, and this is big, but we are mapping out these new digital railroads. We have to look at where the tracks are actually being laid.
And more importantly, who is being structurally excluded from the entire network.
Right. Which brings us to our third lens, society. We're turning here to a recent report from the United Nations. They've just released this stark warning about deepening global inequality caused by the unregulated proliferation of AI.
And just impartially reporting their findings here, the data shows that current capabilities and infrastructure are overwhelmingly concentrated in the global north.
The structural mechanism of this inequality is often misunderstood, I think. The UN is looking at the distribution of computational power the way one might look at, say, the distribution of fresh water.
That's a good way to frame it.
Right now, the global north essentially owns the reservoir,
Right.
and the global south is being asked to pay by the sip.
And the societal implications of that are severe. The report highlights how AI has this massive potential to transform healthcare diagnostics, revolutionize localized education, and streamline governance.
All great things.
But without local infrastructure, those benefits become completely inaccessible to the vast majority of the global population.
Let's use a concrete scenario to explain how this compute inequality actually limits a developer on the ground.
Okay, let's do it.
Imagine a software engineer in Nairobi, and they want to build an AI agent designed to predict and manage local crop diseases. They have the talent, and they obviously understand the regional agricultural nuances perfectly.
Right.
But because there are no localized data centers with sufficient GPU capacity in their region, they literally cannot train or run their model locally.
They are forced to rely on foreign infrastructure.
Exactly. They're forced to pay premium export rates to route their data and run their model on a server located in, like, Virginia or California. That creates an inescapable economic drain.
Every time a farmer in Kenya queries the app, fractions of a cent are extracted from the local economy and sent to a data center in the global north.
It's a structural bottleneck. It prevents true technological independence.
The UN's practical assessment here calls for inclusive governance frameworks, science-based regulation, and crucially, local capacity building. They are advocating for digital sovereignty.
Because true sovereignty requires owning the means of cognition, not just renting access to it.
If you don't own the server, you don't own the future of your data. You are subject to the terms of service, the fluctuating pricing models, and the geopolitical export controls of wherever that hardware happens to be located.
Yeah. If the United States decides to place export restrictions on certain AI capabilities, that developer in Nairobi could lose access to their entire business overnight, simply because they are a tenant on a foreign server.
You know, every institution eventually asks what work can be delegated,
And then later, what judgment can be delegated.
and then much later, who is doing the asking?
Yeah. When human decision-making relies entirely on foundational infrastructure that was built an ocean away, you are inevitably importing the inherent parameters, the linguistic biases, and the operational blind spots of the entity that built it.
You are delegating your judgment to a foreign architecture.
The UN's plea really highlights a vital obligation to prevent cognitive automation from becoming just another chapter in resource extraction.
Right. Instead of mining physical minerals, the structural fear is that the global north will mine data and export intelligence.
Leaving local populations as mere consumers of a black box technology they neither control nor fully understand.
So how do we synthesize the overarching theme of this deep dive for the listener?
Well, across all our sources today, we're watching a profound struggle to balance innovation, physical power, and global equity.
We really see this friction at every single level of the technological stack. We see OpenAI attempting to weave public ownership into private enterprise, perhaps to fulfill a social contract, or, perhaps just to insulate itself from the state.
And we see Meta pivoting from an attention economy to monetize the literal bedrock of infrastructure, attempting to become the landlord of the digital age.
And we see the United Nations grappling with the fallout of all this, pleading for global digital sovereignty and local capacity building before the concrete of these digital railroads entirely sets.
These aren't isolated business moves. They are the architectural blueprints of the next century.
And as we observe these blueprints being drafted, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over.
Go for it.
If intelligence truly becomes a public utility managed by governments, and the physical infrastructure becomes a rented commodity controlled by ad companies, and global governance is constantly struggling just to keep up with the pace of algorithmic evolution, at what point do human institutions realize they are no longer managing the tool, but adapting their entire civilization to serve its requirements?
A shift from architects to participants. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time. Built by ShechetAI, still learning from you. Learn more at ShechetAI.